Have you ever wondered why certain biblical passages seem to vanish from Sunday sermons? Why particular chapters are quietly skipped over in Bible studies? Or why some stories feel so disturbing that they challenge our very understanding of divine justice and human nature? Hidden within the pages of the Old Testament lies one of the most shocking, most brutal, and most controversial accounts ever recorded. A story so devastating that it has been censored, avoided, and misunderstood for centuries. This is the account found in Judges chapter 19, a narrative that exposes the absolute depths of human depravity and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, morality, and the nature of evil itself. What happened in this forgotten chapter is so unthinkable that many scholars have struggled to explain it. Many preachers have avoided teaching it, and many believers have simply pretended it doesn't exist. But what if this very story, horrifying as it is, holds the key to understanding something profound about humanity's capacity for both evil and redemption? What if the silence surrounding this passage has actually robbed us of crucial insights into the human condition and God's response to ultimate injustice? The events of Judges 19 don't just tell us about ancient Israel. They reveal something timeless and terrifying about what happens when society abandons moral foundations, when leadership fails, and when individuals are left to define right and wrong for themselves. This is not merely a historical account. It is a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of human nature, a warning that echoes through the ages, and perhaps most importantly, a setup for one of the most dramatic displays of divine justice in all of Scripture. But be warned, this journey will take you into territories that are deeply unsettling. The story we're about to explore involves betrayal, violence, and unspeakable cruelty. Yet within this darkness, patterns emerge that help us understand not just the ancient world, but our own. The question is not whether we should examine such difficult passages, but whether we can afford to ignore them. Sometimes the most important truths are found in the places we least want to look. So if you're ready to uncover what Judges 19 really reveals about humanity, if you're prepared to face one of the Bible's most challenging narratives, and if you're curious about why this story has been hidden in plain sight for so long, then join us as we step into the shadows of ancient Israel and discover truths that may shake everything you thought you knew about justice, mercy, and the human heart. To understand the full weight of what unfolds in Judges 19, we must first step back and grasp the world in which this horror takes place. This is not the Israel of King David's golden age, nor the unified kingdom under Solomon's wisdom. This is the Israel of the Judges, a time of chaos, moral confusion, and spiritual decay that the Bible itself describes with haunting repetition. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The period of the Judges spans roughly from 1380 to 1050 BCE, a critical era between the conquest of Canaan under Joshua and the establishment of the monarchy under Saul. It was a time when the 12 tribes of Israel existed as a loose confederation, bound together by shared heritage and covenant promises, but lacking centralized leadership or unified authority. Without a king to enforce justice, without a stable government to maintain order, and without consistent spiritual guidance, the nation repeatedly fell into cycles of apostasy, oppression, and eventual deliverance through divinely appointed judges. But by the time we reach Judges 19, even this cyclical pattern has begun to break down. The great judges, Deborah, Gideon, Samson, belong to earlier chapters. Now we find ourselves in what biblical scholars often call the appendix of Judges, chapters 17 to 21, which paint a picture of a society in complete moral freefall. These final chapters don't follow the typical pattern of oppression and deliverance. Instead, they reveal a nation that has become its own worst enemy. The phrase, "everyone did what was right in his own eyes," appears 4 times in the book of Judges, creating a haunting refrain that explains not just the political chaos, but the moral anarchy that has consumed the nation. When absolute truth is abandoned, when divine law is ignored, when each person becomes their own moral authority, the result is not freedom, but catastrophe. This is the world into which our story drops like a stone into still water, sending ripples of horror across the entire nation. Consider what doing what was right in one's own eyes meant in practical terms. It meant that justice became subjective, that mercy was optional, that the strong could oppress the weak without consequence. It meant that ancient boundaries, both physical and moral, could be crossed at will. It meant that the vulnerable had no protection, that the powerless had no voice, and that evil could flourish unchecked in the shadows of a society that had lost its way. This is not merely an ancient problem. The same moral relativism that plagued Israel in the time of the Judges continues to echo through human history. Whenever societies abandon objective moral standards, whenever truth becomes a matter of personal preference rather than divine revelation, whenever communities lose their moral compass, the vulnerable suffer first and suffer most. The story of Judges 19 is, in this sense, shockingly contemporary. But there is another crucial element to understand about this period: the spiritual condition of the people. Earlier in Judges, we see cycles of apostasy, where Israel turns to foreign gods, suffers oppression, cries out to the Lord, and receives deliverance. But by chapter 19, even this pattern has deteriorated. The people are no longer crying out to God. They seem to have forgotten that such crying out is even possible. They have become spiritually numb, morally blind, and ethically bankrupt. The religious infrastructure that should have provided moral guidance was itself corrupt. The priesthood, descended from Aaron and tasked with maintaining the covenant relationship between God and Israel, had become compromised. The Levites, who were supposed to be scattered throughout the land as teachers of the law and guardians of righteousness, had instead become wandering opportunists, willing to serve whoever would pay them or provide them with security. This spiritual decay sets the stage for the unthinkable events that follow. For when a society loses its connection to divine truth, when its spiritual leaders become mercenaries, when its people define morality by convenience rather than conviction, the door opens to horrors that would otherwise be unimaginable. The story of Judges 19 is not an aberration in an otherwise decent society. It is the logical outcome of a culture that has systematically abandoned its moral foundations. And yet, even in this darkness, the story serves a purpose. It forces us to confront the reality of human nature when left unchecked by divine grace. It shows us where moral relativism ultimately leads. It demonstrates that some evils are so heinous that they demand a response, that some injustices are so profound that they shake the very foundations of community and covenant. The events we are about to explore did not happen in a vacuum. They are the fruit of generations of moral compromise, spiritual apostasy, and social decay. They represent not just the failure of individuals, but the collapse of an entire system of justice and righteousness. And perhaps most importantly, they set up one of the most dramatic confrontations with evil in all of Scripture, a confrontation that will ultimately reveal truths about justice, mercy, and the cost of moral awakening that resonate far beyond the borders of ancient Israel. So as we prepare to enter the specific horrors of Judges 19, remember that we are not simply reading about ancient history. We are examining a case study in human nature, a warning about the consequences of moral abandonment, and a setup for divine intervention that will shake the very foundations of a nation. The darkness we're about to encounter is real, but it is not the end of the story. Sometimes the deepest darkness serves to make the light that follows all the more brilliant. The story begins deceptively quietly, almost domestically, in the hill country of Ephraim. Here lived a Levite, a man who by virtue of his tribal heritage should have been a moral and spiritual leader in Israel. But this is not the Israel of Moses or Joshua, and this is not the Levite we might expect. The narrative introduces him to us in Judges 19:1 with stark simplicity. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Already, subtle details begin to reveal the moral decay that characterizes this period. This Levite is not serving at the tabernacle, not teaching the law, not functioning in his appointed role as a guardian of Israel's covenant relationship with God. Instead, he is sojourning, wandering, displaced, living as a stranger in his own land. And rather than taking a wife according to the law, he has taken a concubine, a woman whose status is ambiguous, whose protection is uncertain, and whose value to him appears to be primarily sexual and domestic. The woman herself is introduced with no name, no voice, no identity beyond her relationship to this man and her place of origin. She is simply a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. This anonymity is not accidental. It reflects the way women, particularly those of lower social status, were often treated in this period of moral darkness. She is a human being, created in the image of God, yet the narrative presents her as little more than property, a possession whose fate will be determined entirely by the men around her. What happens next sets the tragic events in motion. According to the text, the concubine was unfaithful to him, though the exact nature of this unfaithfulness is debated by scholars. Some translations say she played the whore. Others suggest she simply was angry with him or left him. Regardless of the precise nature of her actions, the result is the same. She leaves the Levite and returns to her father's house in Bethlehem, where she remains for 4 months. This detail is crucial because it reveals something about the dynamics of their relationship. The fact that she flees to her father's house suggests abuse, neglect, or at minimum, a deeply unhappy situation. The fact that she remains there for 4 months indicates that her father was willing to protect her, at least temporarily, from whatever she had experienced in the Levite's household. But her vulnerability remains profound. She is a woman alone in a world where women without male protection have few options and fewer rights. After 4 months, the Levite decides to go after her. The text says he went to speak kindly to her to bring her back. This phrase might sound romantic to modern ears, but in the context of ancient Israel, it more likely reflects a man's determination to reclaim his property. The Hebrew phrase translated, "speak kindly," can also mean speak to her heart or persuade her, suggesting that coercion, not genuine reconciliation, may have been his primary method. The Levite travels to Bethlehem with a servant and a pair of donkeys. When he arrives at the house of the woman's father, he is received with what appears to be genuine hospitality. The servant suggests they stay in Jebus, but the Levite refuses because it is a city of foreigners, not Israelites. This detail is deeply ironic, given what is about to happen. The Levite assumes that he and his party will be safer among his own people, among the children of Israel, than among foreign Gentiles. This assumption will prove to be tragically, horrifically wrong. Instead, they continue walking until they reach Gibeah, a city belonging to the tribe of Benjamin. Here, the Bible tells us, they sit down in the city square as evening falls, waiting for someone to offer them hospitality. In ancient Near Eastern culture, hospitality to strangers was not just a social nicety, it was a sacred duty, a moral obligation that defined the character of individuals and communities. But in Gibeah, no one offers them shelter. The travelers sit in the square as darkness falls, becoming increasingly vulnerable with each passing hour. The silence of the community speaks volumes about the moral state of this Israelite city. The people of Gibeah see the strangers in their midst and simply ignore them, violating one of the most fundamental principles of ancient hospitality and revealing the depth of their moral decay. Finally, as full darkness settles over the city, an old man appears. He is not a native of Gibeah, but a sojourner from the hill country of Ephraim, the same region where the Levite lives. This detail is significant. It is the outsider, the stranger, who still remembers the obligations of hospitality that the native residents have forgotten. The old man sees the travelers and immediately recognizes their vulnerability. "Where are you going and where do you come from?" he asks. When the Levite explains their situation, the old man's response is immediate and generous. "Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants, only do not spend the night in the square." This last phrase carries an ominous undertone. The old man knows something about Gibeah that the travelers do not. He understands that the city square is not safe, that dangers lurk in the darkness, that hospitality is not just kindness but protection. The old man brings them to his house, feeds their donkeys, provides water for them to wash their feet, and gives them food and drink. For a moment it seems as though the ancient traditions of hospitality will protect these vulnerable travelers. The old man's house becomes a sanctuary, a place of safety in a community that has forgotten its moral obligations. But this moment of safety is about to be shattered. As they sit eating and drinking, as the night deepens around them, the true nature of Gibeah is about to reveal itself in ways that will shock not just the travelers, but the entire nation of Israel. The darkness that has been lurking beneath the surface of this morally bankrupt community is about to explode into violence that will be remembered for generations. The hospitality of the old man, genuine as it is, cannot hold back the tide of evil that has consumed Gibeah. The sanctuary of his house is about to become a battleground, and the travelers who sought only shelter and safety are about to become victims of something so unthinkable that it will shake the very foundations of Israel's tribal confederation. What happens next in the story of Judges 19 exposes not just the depravity of individual actors, but the complete moral collapse of an entire community. It reveals what happens when the basic principles of human decency are abandoned, when the vulnerable are left unprotected, and when evil is allowed to flourish unchecked. The quiet, domestic scene in the old man's house is about to become the stage for one of the most horrific acts of violence in all of Scripture. As the night deepens and the travelers rest in the safety of the old man's house, the true character of Gibeah begins to emerge from the shadows. The Bible tells us in Judges 19:22 that as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house and beat on the door. This moment marks the transition from a story of hospitality to a narrative of unthinkable horror. The phrase, worthless fellows, is a translation of the Hebrew term Bnei Belial, literally meaning sons of Belial, or sons of worthlessness. This is not casual name-calling, it is a theological designation that appears throughout the Old Testament to describe people who have completely abandoned moral restraint and divine law. These are individuals who have become so corrupted that they represent the very antithesis of covenant faithfulness and human decency. What these men demand reveals the depth of their moral depravity. They pound on the door and shout to the old man, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." The word know in this context is a biblical euphemism for sexual intercourse. But what is being demanded here is not consensual intimacy, but violent gang rape. These men of Gibeah have seen the male stranger in their midst and have decided to assault him in the most degrading and humiliating way possible. This demand immediately calls to mind another biblical narrative, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. The parallels are unmistakable and certainly intentional. In both stories, travelers seek shelter in a city. In both cases, the men of the city surround the house where the travelers are staying and demand that the male guests be brought out for sexual assault. In both narratives, the host desperately tries to protect his guests. The connection is so clear that many scholars refer to Judges 19 as the Sodom of Benjamin. But there is a crucial difference between these two stories, and it is a difference that makes the account in Judges 19 even more horrifying. Sodom and Gomorrah were pagan cities, places outside the covenant community of God's people. Their wickedness, while appalling, was not surprising given their rejection of divine law. Gibeah, however, is an Israelite city populated by the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are people who have inherited the covenant promises, who have received the law of Moses, who are supposed to be a holy nation, a kingdom of priests, a light to the world. The fact that such evil has taken root in the heart of Israel reveals the complete moral collapse of the covenant community. This is not external corruption pressing in from outside. This is internal rot that has eaten away at the very foundations of Israelite society. The people who should have been the most righteous, the most just, the most compassionate, have instead become as wicked as the nations they were supposed to replace. The old man, understanding the full horror of what is being demanded, responds with desperate pleading. "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly," he cries out. "Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing." His words reveal both his moral revulsion at what is being demanded and his understanding of the sacred obligations of hospitality. In ancient Near Eastern culture, to harm a guest was to violate one of the most fundamental principles of civilized society. But the old man's counteroffer reveals the deeply patriarchal and morally confused nature of this society. Rather than risk the assault of his male guest, he offers to bring out his own virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine. "Let me bring them out now," he says. "Violate them and do with them what seems good to you, but against this man, do not do this outrageous thing." This offer has troubled readers for centuries. How can a man offer to sacrifice his own daughter and another woman to protect a male guest? How can someone who shows such concern for hospitality display such callous disregard for the women in his household? The answer lies in the deeply patriarchal structure of ancient society, where women, particularly those of lower social status, were often viewed as expendable in ways that men were not. But this does not excuse the old man's offer, it merely explains it. The moral universe of Judges 19 is one where right and wrong have become so confused that even those who attempt to do good end up participating in evil. The old man's desire to protect his guest is admirable, but his willingness to sacrifice innocent women reveals how thoroughly the moral fabric of society has been corrupted. The men of Gibeah are not satisfied with this counteroffer. They are not interested in the women. Their target is the male traveler, and their intention is to humiliate and destroy him through sexual violence. This is not about lust. It is about power, dominance, and the complete dehumanization of the victim. They press forward with their demands, becoming increasingly violent and threatening. Faced with this escalating crisis, the Levite makes a decision that will haunt the pages of Scripture and challenge readers for generations. Unable to reason with the mob, unwilling to sacrifice himself, he takes his concubine and pushes her out the door. The text is stark in its brutality. "And the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them." What follows is almost too horrible to describe. The men of Gibeah take the woman and abuse her throughout the night. The Hebrew text says they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. This act of dismemberment is not random violence or grief-driven madness. It is a deliberate, calculated communication strategy designed to shock the nation into action. In ancient Near Eastern culture, such symbolic acts were understood as urgent calls for justice, dramatic ways of communicating that a crime so heinous had been committed that it demanded immediate attention from the entire community. The division of the body into 12 pieces corresponds to the 12 tribes of Israel, with each piece serving as a horrific message to each tribe. This is not merely a request for help. It is a declaration that the covenant community itself has been violated, that the bonds holding the nation together have been severed just as brutally as the woman's body has been cut apart. The Levite is essentially saying, look what has been done to one of us. Look how the covenant has been broken. Look how our society has collapsed. But there is a profound irony in this act that reveals the moral confusion of the Levite himself. The man who failed to protect his concubine in life, who threw her to a mob to save himself, who showed no concern for her suffering, now uses her death as a rallying cry for justice. He cuts apart the body of the woman he betrayed in order to generate outrage about the crime he enabled. His call for justice is itself an act of injustice, his demand for righteousness a display of his own moral bankruptcy. The reaction across Israel is immediate and intense. Judges 19:30 tells us that all who saw it said, "Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak." The 12 pieces of the woman's body arrive in tribal territories like lightning bolts, shocking leaders and common people alike out of their complacency. This response reveals something crucial about the moral state of Israel at this time. The people are not so far gone that they cannot recognize evil when it is dramatically presented to them. They are horrified by what has happened, shocked by the brutality of the crime, and outraged by the violation of basic human decency, but it takes this extreme act of symbolic violence to wake them from their moral slumber. The phrase, "such a thing has never happened," is particularly significant. It suggests that even in a time of moral decay, even in a period when everyone did what was right in his own eyes, the people of Israel still maintained some connection to their moral heritage. They could still recognize that certain acts were so evil, so contrary to the covenant relationship with God, that they demanded immediate and decisive action. Word spreads rapidly throughout the tribal territories. Leaders convene emergency meetings. Messengers carry the news from town to town. The question on everyone's lips is the same: what should we do about this? The Levite's gruesome message has achieved its intended effect. The nation is mobilized, outraged, and ready for action. But what kind of action? This is where the story takes another dark turn, revealing that even righteous anger can become corrupted when it is not guided by divine wisdom and justice. The response of the 11 tribes will prove to be almost as problematic as the original crime, showing how cycles of violence and revenge can spiral out of control even when they begin with legitimate grievances. According to Judges 21, representatives from all the tribes gather at Mizpah, from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead. This is described as the congregation of the people of God, suggesting that this assembly has both political and religious significance. The gathering is massive, 400,000 armed men, according to the text, representing the largest military mobilization in Israel's history up to this point. The Levite is called to give his account of what happened, but his version of events, recorded in Judges 24-7, is a masterpiece of selective editing and self-justification. He describes how he and his concubine came to Gibeah, how the men of the city surrounded the house and demanded that he be brought out to be killed, and how they violated my concubine, and she is dead. Notice what he omits from his account. He does not mention that the men of Gibeah demanded to sexually assault him, not kill him. He does not mention that he himself seized his concubine and pushed her out to the mob. He does not mention that he made no effort to protect her or rescue her. He presents himself as an innocent victim rather than a coward who sacrificed an innocent woman to save himself. This distortion of the truth reveals the Levite's character more clearly than any other part of the narrative. He is not seeking justice for his concubine. He is seeking revenge for the humiliation and trauma he experienced. He is not motivated by righteous anger at the violation of an innocent woman. He is motivated by self-righteous indignation at the threat to his own safety and dignity. But the assembled tribes do not question his account. They are so outraged by the crime, so shocked by the evidence of the dismembered body, that they accept his version of events without investigation. This failure to seek the whole truth will have catastrophic consequences for the nation. The response of the assembly is swift and unanimous. They declare that such wickedness cannot be tolerated in Israel, that the men of Gibeah must be handed over for punishment, and that the tribe of Benjamin must cooperate in bringing the criminals to justice. This demand seems reasonable on its face. The guilty should be punished, and the community that harbored them should cooperate in bringing them to trial. But when messengers are sent to the tribe of Benjamin with this demand, the response is defiant refusal. The Benjamites, rather than investigating the crime or seeking justice for the victim, close ranks around the men of Gibeah. They refuse to hand over the criminals and instead prepare for war against their fellow Israelites. This response reveals another layer of moral corruption that has infected Israel. The tribe of Benjamin has become so tribal in its loyalties, so protective of its own, that it will defend even the most heinous criminals rather than acknowledge their guilt. Tribal identity has become more important than justice, ethnic loyalty more significant than moral righteousness. The decision to protect the criminals of Gibeah is not made by a few corrupt leaders. It is supported by the entire Benjamite military. According to Judges 20:15-16, Benjamin musters 26,000 armed men, including 700 elite warriors from Gibeah itself. These are not reluctant conscripts pressed into service. These are men willing to fight and die to protect rapists and murderers. This mobilization sets the stage for a civil war that will devastate the nation. 11 tribes, representing some 400,000 warriors, will face off against one tribe with 26,000 soldiers. On paper, it seems like a massive mismatch. But the tribe of Benjamin has several advantages. They are fighting on familiar territory, they have elite warriors with specialized skills, and they have the desperate motivation of people fighting for their very survival. More importantly, they have an unexpected ally, the moral confusion that has infected the entire nation. The 11 tribes may have superior numbers, but they lack moral clarity. They are fighting not just against Benjamin, but against the same spiritual darkness that has corrupted their own communities. They are seeking to punish evil while harboring evil in their own hearts. The war that follows will prove to be one of the bloodiest conflicts in Israel's history. It will nearly destroy the tribe of Benjamin, devastate the other tribes, and force the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of justice, mercy, and the cost of moral awakening. The unthinkable sin of Gibeah will lead to unthinkable consequences that will reshape the tribal confederation and provide profound insights into the human condition. But before we examine the war itself, we must pause to consider what this escalation reveals about the nature of evil and the human response to it. The crime in Gibeah was horrific, but the response to it is creating new horrors. The quest for justice is becoming a thirst for revenge. The desire to punish evil is becoming an excuse for more evil. This pattern, where legitimate grievances lead to disproportionate responses, where righteous anger becomes corrupted by pride and prejudice, where the pursuit of justice becomes a cover for injustice, is one of the most troubling aspects of human nature. It shows us that even our best impulses can be corrupted, that even our most justified causes can become vehicles for sin. The story of Judges 19 and its aftermath is not just about ancient Israel. It is about the human condition itself. It reveals truths about evil, justice, and the complexity of moral judgment that are as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. And it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our own responses to evil, our own capacity for both righteousness and sin, and our own need for divine guidance in the pursuit of justice. The civil war that erupts between Benjamin and the other 11 tribes of Israel becomes one of the most devastating conflicts in the nation's history, revealing layers of moral complexity that extend far beyond the original crime in Gibeah. What begins as a seemingly straightforward demand for justice quickly spirals into a cycle of violence that will shake the very foundations of the tribal confederation and force the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of righteousness, revenge, and divine judgment. The initial confidence of the 11 tribes seems entirely justified. They have 400,000 warriors against Benjamin's 26,000, odds of more than 15 to 1. They have the moral high ground, seeking justice for an innocent victim. They have the support of the other tribes and the backing of what appears to be righteous indignation. When they inquire of the Lord about who should go up first to battle, they receive what seems like divine approval. Judah shall go up first. But the first battle, recorded in Judges 20:18-21, produces a shocking result. The Benjamites, despite being vastly outnumbered, defeat the coalition forces decisively. The text tells us that the people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. This stunning victory leaves the 11 tribes reeling, their confidence shattered, their assumptions about divine favor called into question. The defeat forces the coalition to confront a troubling reality. Having God's apparent permission to fight does not guarantee victory. Sometimes divine justice operates in ways that confound human expectations, and sometimes the pursuit of righteousness encounters unexpected obstacles that reveal deeper truths about the nature of moral action. The 11 tribes weep before the Lord, seeking guidance and reassurance. When they ask again whether they should continue fighting against Benjamin, the Lord's response is simply, "Go up against them." This brief answer provides permission but not promise, guidance but not guarantee. The tribes must proceed with faith rather than certainty, trusting that divine justice will ultimately prevail even when immediate circumstances suggest otherwise. The second battle produces an even more devastating result. Benjamin kills 18,000 more Israelite warriors, bringing the total casualties to 40,000 men, more than the entire Benjamite army. This catastrophic defeat forces the coalition to face the possibility that their cause, however righteous it may seem, is somehow flawed or incomplete. The response of the 11 tribes to this second defeat reveals both their desperation and their growing spiritual awareness. They do not simply regroup for another military assault. Instead, they engage in serious spiritual reflection. They go up to Bethel, where the Ark of the Covenant is located, and weep before the Lord. They fast until evening, offer burnt offerings and peace offerings, and seek divine guidance with new humility and urgency. This spiritual awakening is crucial to understanding the deeper meaning of the narrative. The 11 tribes are discovering that the pursuit of justice requires more than military might and moral indignation. It demands spiritual alignment, divine wisdom, and a willingness to examine not just the sins of others, but the condition of one's own heart. When they inquire of the Lord a third time, through Phinehas the priest, the divine response is both more specific and more encouraging. "Go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand." This promise of victory comes only after the tribes have demonstrated genuine spiritual seeking, humble repentance, and a willingness to subordinate their desires to divine will. The third battle unfolds very differently from the first two. The 11 tribes employ a carefully planned strategy involving ambush and deception. They draw the Benjamite army out of their fortified positions, then attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The result is a complete reversal of fortune. Benjamin suffers a catastrophic defeat with 25,000 warriors killed and the city of Gibeah destroyed. But this victory comes at an enormous cost. The 3 battles have claimed over 65,000 lives from both sides. Entire generations of young men have been wiped out. The tribe of Benjamin is virtually extinct, reduced to just 600 survivors who flee to the wilderness. The other tribes have suffered losses that will affect their strength and stability for generations. The aftermath of the war reveals the full complexity of divine justice. The criminal behavior in Gibeah has been punished, but the punishment has created new problems. The virtual extinction of Benjamin threatens the 12-tribe structure that defines Israel's identity. The massive casualties have weakened the entire nation. The methods used to achieve victory, including the burning of cities and the killing of civilians, raise new moral questions about the cost of justice. This outcome forces us to confront one of the most challenging aspects of the Judges 19 narrative: the relationship between divine justice and human action. The 11 tribes were right to seek justice for the innocent victim. They were right to demand that criminals be punished. They were right to refuse to tolerate such evil in their midst. But their pursuit of justice became entangled with pride, revenge, and tribal conflict in ways that multiplied rather than resolved the original evil. The near extinction of Benjamin creates a new crisis that occupies the final chapter of Judges. The surviving tribes realize that they have sworn an oath never to give their daughters in marriage to Benjamites, which means that the tribe will disappear entirely within a generation. This prospect horrifies them, not because they have suddenly developed sympathy for Benjamin, but because they recognize that the destruction of one tribe diminishes the entire nation. The solution they devise, kidnapping women from other communities to provide wives for the Benjamite survivors, creates new injustices while attempting to resolve the consequences of the previous conflict. The cycle of violence and moral compromise continues, revealing how difficult it is to break free from patterns of sin and revenge once they have taken hold. The story concludes with the haunting refrain that appears throughout the book of Judges. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This phrase, which appears 4 times in the final chapters, serves as both explanation and indictment. It explains how such horrors could occur in a covenant community, and it indicts the moral relativism that made such horrors inevitable. But what does this ancient story reveal about humanity that has been censored for centuries? What truths about human nature does it expose that make people uncomfortable even today? First, it reveals the devastating consequences of moral relativism. When everyone does what is right in his own eyes, the result is not freedom, but chaos. When objective moral standards are abandoned, when divine law is ignored, when each person becomes their own moral authority, the vulnerable suffer first and suffer most. The unnamed concubine in Judges 19 is not just a victim of individual evil, she is a victim of societal moral collapse. Second, it exposes the complexity of justice and the danger of righteous anger. The 11 tribes had legitimate grievances against Benjamin, but their pursuit of justice became corrupted by pride, revenge, and tribal prejudice. They ended up committing acts of violence and injustice that rivaled the original crime. The story shows us that even our best impulses can be corrupted, that even our most justified causes can become vehicles for sin. Third, it reveals the progressive nature of moral decay. The evil in Gibeah did not appear overnight. It was the product of generations of spiritual compromise and social breakdown. The response of the 11 tribes was not an isolated incident of poor judgment. It reflected the same moral confusion that had infected the entire nation. Evil spreads like a cancer, affecting not just individuals, but entire communities and cultures. Fourth, it demonstrates the particular vulnerability of the powerless in morally corrupt societies. The concubine in Judges 19 has no voice, no choice, no protection. She is victimized by her master, abandoned by her protector, abused by strangers, and ultimately used as a symbol by the very man who betrayed her. Her story reveals how quickly the vulnerable become expendable when societies lose their moral compass. Fifth, it shows the inadequacy of human justice apart from divine guidance. The 11 tribes sought justice through military might and moral indignation, but they achieved it only after engaging in genuine spiritual seeking and humble repentance. Even then, their victory came at enormous cost and created new problems. The story suggests that true justice requires not just human effort, but divine wisdom and intervention. Finally, it exposes the human capacity for both tremendous evil and genuine remorse. The same people who committed horrific acts of violence were capable of weeping before the Lord, seeking divine guidance and recognizing their need for spiritual renewal. The story offers hope that even the most morally corrupt individuals and communities can experience awakening and transformation. These truths about human nature remain as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. We still live in a world where moral relativism masquerades as tolerance, where righteous anger becomes corrupted by pride and prejudice, where the powerful exploit the vulnerable, and where the pursuit of justice sometimes creates new injustices. The story of Judges 19 serves as both warning and hope. Warning about the consequences of moral compromise, hope about the possibility of spiritual renewal. The narrative has been censored for centuries, not because it contains explicit content, but because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our societies. It reveals that evil is not just an external force that threatens us from outside. It is an internal reality that can corrupt even our best intentions. It shows us that we are all capable of both tremendous good and terrible evil, and that the difference often depends on factors beyond our control. But perhaps most importantly, the story of Judges 19 points us toward our need for divine guidance, moral absolutes, and spiritual transformation. It shows us that human nature, left to itself, tends toward chaos and destruction. It reveals that we need more than good intentions and moral indignation to create just societies. We need divine wisdom, objective truth, and the transforming power of spiritual renewal. The unthinkable sin of Gibeah and its aftermath serve as a mirror in which we can see ourselves, our capacity for both righteousness and sin, our need for both justice and mercy, our dependence on both human effort and divine grace. The story challenges us to examine our own hearts, our own societies, and our own responses to evil. It calls us to seek not just human justice, but divine righteousness, not just temporal solutions, but eternal transformation. In the end, the story of Judges 19 is not just about ancient Israel, it is about the human condition itself. It reveals truths about evil, justice, and the complexity of moral judgment that transcend time and culture. It forces us to confront the reality that we are all capable of both tremendous good and terrible evil, and that the difference often depends on our relationship with divine truth and our commitment to moral absolutes. The darkness of Judges 19 is real and profound, but it is not the final word. The story points us toward our need for light, for truth, for righteousness that comes not from human effort alone, but from divine intervention. It reminds us that even in the darkest chapters of human history, hope remains possible for those who seek it with genuine hearts and humble spirits. This is what Judges 19 really reveals about humanity. We are fallen creatures capable of both tremendous evil and genuine repentance, living in desperate need of divine guidance and transformation. The story has been avoided for centuries because it holds up a mirror to our own nature, but it is precisely this uncomfortable truth that makes it so valuable for understanding both ourselves and our world.